Imagine waking up late for work and discovering that your body no longer belongs to you. Your arms have become thin, twitching legs. Your back is covered by a hard shell. Your voice sounds strange. You are still thinking like a human being, but no one looking at you would believe it. This is how Franz Kafka begins The Metamorphosis. There is no explanation, no experiment, no curse, no dramatic warning. Gregor Samsa simply wakes one morning transformed into a monstrous insect, and yet his first thought is not terror. It is work. He worries about missing the train. He worries about his manager. He worries that his employer will think he is lazy. Before Gregor asks what has happened to his body, he asks how he will explain being late. That detail tells us almost everything. Gregor was already trapped before he became an insect. The transformation only makes his invisible prison visible. Before the transformation, Gregor works as a traveling salesman. He hates the job. He hates the constant trains, bad meals, shallow conversations, and endless pressure. But he continues because his family depends on him. His father's business failed. His parents owe money. His younger sister, Grete, dreams of studying music. Gregor carries the entire household financially. He does not live for pleasure, ambition, or freedom. He lives to pay debts. He tells himself that one day, after the family's obligations are settled, he will finally quit, but that day never comes. Every month of sacrifice becomes an excuse for another month. Gregor believes he is supporting his family. In reality, he has become the structure holding everyone else in place. As long as he earns the money, his father does not need to work. His mother remains dependent. Grete can continue dreaming. Gregor's sacrifice appears noble, but it has also created a family that survives by consuming his energy. He has become useful, and because he is useful, everyone assumes he will continue to endure anything. When Gregor fails to leave for work, his family gathers outside his bedroom. They knock, they call his name, they demand an explanation. Then a manager from Gregor's company arrives. He does not come because he is worried. He comes because one missed train is enough to make Gregor suspicious. The manager immediately questions his loyalty, performance, and character. Gregor tries to answer inside his mind. The words are clear. Outside, they emerge as animal sounds. This is one of the novel's central horrors. Gregor still understands everyone. No one can understand him. The transformation does not destroy his mind. It destroys his ability to prove that his mind still exists. When Gregor finally opens the door, the reactions are immediate. The manager flees, his mother collapses. His father drives him back into the room. No one asks whether Gregor is frightened. No one tries to discover what he needs. The family sees a creature. Gregor sees himself. The tragedy begins in the distance between those two realities. At first, Grete is the only person willing to enter Gregor's room. She brings him food. She studies what he can eat. She removes spoiled meals. She tries to make the room more comfortable. Gregor feels grateful. He also feels ashamed. He hides beneath the sofa so she will not have to look at him. Their relationship becomes the emotional center of the story. Grete cannot speak with Gregor, but she pays attention. She notices his behavior. She learns his preferences. She interprets what he cannot say. For a time, care replaces language. But even this care contains a dangerous imbalance. Grete begins as Gregor's helper. Then she becomes his manager. She decides what he needs. She decides when the room should be cleaned. She decides what furniture should remain. Gregor is alive, but he has lost authority over his own life. The more dependent he becomes, the more others speak for him. Gregor discovers that he can crawl across walls and ceilings. Grete believes removing the furniture will give him more space. His mother is uncertain. She worries that an empty room would mean the family has accepted that Gregor will never become human again. Gregor listens from hiding. At first he agrees with Grete. The open space would suit his new body. Then he sees them carrying away the objects connected to his human life. The desk where he studied, the chest of drawers, the furniture that proves a person once lived there. Suddenly, the removal feels like erasure. Gregor is adapting physically, but he does not want his human identity removed with the furniture. He clings to a framed picture on the wall, an image of a woman dressed in fur. The picture has no deep emotional history, but it is his. He chose it. He framed it. It represents taste, memory, and private ownership. By protecting the picture, Gregor is saying something he can no longer express in words. I was a person, I had preferences. This room was my life. Do not erase me while I am still here. Gregor's transformation forces the family to change. His father returns to work. His mother begins sewing. Grete takes a job. The household that seemed helpless suddenly discovers that it can function. This changes the meaning of Gregor's earlier sacrifice. The family depended on him, but perhaps not because they had no alternative. They depended on him because he made dependence comfortable. Gregor gave everything. The others adjusted around his giving. When he can no longer provide, they become active. His father changes most dramatically. The tired, defeated man Gregor once supported now wears a uniform, stands upright, and moves with authority. But his renewed strength is directed against his son. One day, after Gregor leaves his room, his father attacks him with apples. He throws them like weapons. One strikes Gregor's back and becomes lodged in his body. The wound never properly heals. The apple is more than an injury. It becomes a permanent symbol of rejection. Gregor spent years feeding his family. Now his father uses food to wound him. The provider has become the burden. The son has become the target. As time passes, Gregor's room changes. At first it is treated as a sick person's room. Later it becomes a storage space. Unwanted furniture is pushed inside. Dust gathers, the door is opened less often. Gregor receives less food, his body becomes weaker. This physical neglect reflects his social disappearance. The family does not kill him, they simply reduce the attention that confirms he exists. Kafka understands that cruelty is not always dramatic. Sometimes cruelty is administrative. A meal arrives late, a room is not cleaned. A door remains closed, a person's needs are treated as inconvenient. Nothing appears large enough to be called violence. But together these small acts erase a life. Gregor's suffering becomes part of the household routine. Once pain becomes familiar, people stop reacting to it. Because the family needs money, they rent part of the apartment to 3 lodgers. The lodgers are demanding. Serious and easily offended, they expect order. The family serves them carefully. Gregor, who once paid for the home, is hidden so the new sources of income will not be disturbed. This reversal is brutal. The apartment still belongs to the Samsas, yet they behave like servants in their own home. Economic necessity reorganizes every relationship. Respect flows toward whoever provides money. Shame is attached to whoever cannot. Gregor's value once came from his salary. Now the lodgers receive the attention he used to receive. Kafka shows a world in which human worth is quietly measured by productivity. The family may love Gregor in memory, but memory cannot compete with rent. One evening, Grete plays the violin for the lodgers. Gregor hears the music from his room. He is deeply moved. The lodgers barely care. They listen with boredom and judgment. But Gregor, the creature everyone considers less than human, responds with the greatest sensitivity. He crawls toward the music. He imagines telling Grete that he always planned to send her to a conservatory. He wants to reveal that her dream mattered to him. This is one of the most painful moments in the novel. Gregor's body has become animal-like, but his emotional life remains rich. The supposedly civilized men are indifferent. The insect understands beauty. The humans understand money. Kafka reverses the categories. Who is truly human in this room? The being who looks human but feels nothing? Or the being who looks monstrous but is moved by art, memory, and love? Gregor's appearance frightens the lodgers. They threaten to leave without paying. The family reaches a breaking point. Then Grete speaks. She says they must get rid of Gregor. She no longer calls him her brother. She refers to him as it. She argues that if the creature were truly Gregor, it would understand that the family cannot continue living this way. This argument is cruel because it uses Gregor's love against him. If he cares about us, he should disappear if he stays. He proves he is not really Gregor. Grete creates a trap with no possible defense. Gregor cannot speak. He cannot explain. He cannot remind her who paid the bills, encouraged her music, or protected her future. The sister who once understood him better than anyone now declares that understanding him is impossible. At that moment, Gregor loses his final human connection. Gregor returns to his room. He is weak, injured, and starving. He thinks about his family with tenderness. He does not die angry. He dies believing they may be better without him. This is the final result of his life of sacrifice. Gregor has been trained to measure his existence by usefulness. Once he becomes convinced that his existence harms others, death feels like one last service he can provide. He dies alone before sunrise. The cleaning woman finds the body. She announces it casually. The family gathers. Their first response is relief. They take the day off. They leave the apartment. They travel into the countryside for the first time in a long while. They speak about the future with hope. Gregor's death restores movement to their lives. That is what makes the ending so disturbing. The family does not collapse from grief. It expands into possibility. The final transformation in the story does not belong to Gregor. It belongs to Grete. At the beginning, she is a young girl with artistic dreams. During Gregor's illness, she becomes responsible, tired, and increasingly powerful within the family. After his death, her parents notice that she has grown into a healthy young woman. They begin thinking about finding her a husband. Gregor disappears. Grete becomes the family's new future. One child is removed from the center, another is placed there. The family system survives by transferring its hopes. Gregor's transformation was physical. Grete's is social. She becomes an adult through care. Resentment, and finally rejection. The title, The Metamorphosis, may refer to more than one body. Every character changes. Gregor becomes visibly monstrous. His father becomes powerful. His mother becomes passive and fearful. Grete becomes independent, then ruthless. The family becomes functional only after losing the person who once made its comfort possible. The obvious horror of the metamorphosis is that a man wakes up as an insect. But Kafka does not spend much time explaining the body. The real horror is social. Gregor's transformation reveals that his place in the family was conditional. He was loved while he was useful. He was tolerated while there was hope he might recover. He became unwanted when dependence had no visible end. This is why the story remains powerful. Many people fear becoming helpless more than they fear death. They fear illness, unemployment, disability, aging, anything that might make them dependent on others, not only because dependence is difficult, but because they suspect affection may have limits. Gregor's insect body turns that fear into an image. What happens when you can no longer perform the role that made others value you? Do they still see you? Do they still listen? Do they still call you by your name? Gregor's job has already separated him from himself. He travels constantly but never arrives anywhere meaningful. He speaks to customers but forms no real relationships. He earns money but has no life. He supports his family but cannot speak honestly with them. The transformation does not create alienation, it completes it. Before becoming an insect, Gregor is treated like a machine. He wakes early, he follows schedules, he obeys authority, he produces income. When the machine stops working, the people around it do not ask what it feels. They ask when it will function again. Kafka's world is frightening because no villain controls it. There is no evil scientist, no supernatural enemy. There is only work, debt, family pressure, shame, and habit. Gregor is destroyed by ordinary systems. That makes the story feel uncomfortably real. Gregor never seriously blames his family. Even when they neglect him, he worries about frightening them. Even when his father attacks him, Gregor interprets the violence through the family's stress. Even when Grete rejects him, he accepts her judgment. His greatest prison is guilt. He believes needing care is a moral failure. He believes causing inconvenience is the same as causing harm. He believes love must be earned through sacrifice. This is why Gregor's mind becomes as dangerous to him as his body. No one needs to force him to disappear once he becomes convinced that everyone would be happier without him. Kafka shows how exploitation becomes most powerful when the exploited person begins enforcing it internally. Gregor's family judges his value by what he provides. Eventually, Gregor judges himself the same way. The story never explains why Gregor transforms. That absence matters. If Kafka gave us a cause, we would focus on solving it. A disease could be treated, a curse could be broken. A scientific accident could be reversed, but without a cause, the transformation cannot become a puzzle. It remains a condition. The question is not, how can Gregor become human again? The question is, how will people treat him now? Kafka removes explanation so that behavior becomes the center of the story. The transformation is impossible. The reactions are painfully believable. Gregor's body can represent many things. It can represent illness, depression, disability, economic failure, social shame, the feeling of being trapped inside a role others have chosen for you. But the insect should not be reduced to one simple symbol. Its power comes from combining several fears at once. Gregor is disgusting to others, unable to communicate, financially useless, dependent, hidden, and still conscious enough to understand every rejection. The body expresses the experience of becoming socially invisible while remaining emotionally alive. That is why the image is unforgettable. The metamorphosis begins with a man whose body changes overnight. But Gregor's deepest tragedy began much earlier. It began when he accepted that his own life could be postponed indefinitely. It began when duty replaced identity. It began when usefulness became the price of belonging. By the time he becomes an insect, Gregor has already forgotten how to ask for anything for himself. The transformation does not take away his freedom. It reveals that he never had much freedom to lose. Franz Kafka leaves us with a brutal question. If your work disappeared, if your money disappeared, if your strength disappeared, if you could no longer serve the people around you, who would still recognize you? Gregor Samsa wakes up as an insect, but that is not the most frightening part. The most frightening part is how quickly everyone decides that the insect is all he ever was.